Will there be negotiations between Ukraine and Russia in 2025? What ultimatum will the new White House administration issue to Putin? Is an opposition uprising possible in Russia? We will talk about this and more in our stream. My name is Anastasia Noritsyna, and we are also joined by Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion. I'm very happy to welcome you. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Harry Kimovich, the last time you and I spoke was the day before the U.S. elections, and you told me then that Trump was dangerous for American democracy and dangerous for Ukraine. Have you changed your opinion now? No, I was quite categorical in my assessment. I said that Trump is dangerous. Danger does not mean disaster. It means that the man is extremely unpredictable. I see no reason to change my view. A lot of Trump's actions, especially before the inauguration, point to a turbulent period for U.S. democracy in the next 4 years. This does not mean disaster. U.S. democracy is strong enough. Various influence groups are forming around Trump, and although Elon Musk is the most prominent right now, I believe a balance of interests will be achieved. I think there is cautious optimism right now that Trump will try to find a fulcrum that will keep the situation from spiraling out of control. This applies to both domestic and foreign policy. So I wouldn't jump to any tentative conclusions right now about what Trump's position on Ukraine, on the war, and on relations with Russia will be. He's clearly looking for options to help him, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be bad for Ukraine. Although I wouldn't go to the other extreme and expect revelations from Trump. If he says he will give Ukraine weapons until peace is achieved, that doesn't mean anything yet. It is Trump's unpredictability that makes him dangerous. So it is important to monitor the situation and try to influence, if not Trump himself, then the people who create the necessary background for decision-making in Washington. Trump sent a message to Zelensky to start thinking about a ceasefire and giving back all the occupied territories, Els writes, and they say that Trump has repeatedly stated that there are almost no territories left. More accurately, the territories are there, but the people are gone, and he claims it's a decade-long reconstruction. What is the likelihood that Donald Trump will go along with Putin's terms after all? Putin demands that we give up 4 regions, Crimea, not join NATO, and so on. Or what could be the deal that would be favorable for Ukraine as well?
Putin же требует, чтобы мы ему отдали 4 региона, Крым, не вступали в НАТО и так далее. Или в чем может заключаться сделка, чтобы она была выгодной и для Украины?
No, the option you just described, I believe, is simply not science fiction, because no Trump can do it. One reason that this is not accepted even in Europe is that Trump is not the only player, albeit a major one, in this complex geopolitical game. Trump will seek a peace treaty, but it will likely be temporary, as there will be no recognition of the occupied territories. I do not envision that Trump can move away from the line that Ukraine occupies today. We can envision a situation in which Trump pressures Ukraine to agree to a demarcation line on the current demarcation. By the way, the question arises here, what to do with Kursk in this case. After all, if you withdraw from the Kursk region, it is not so simple. There are no simple solutions here. And forcing Ukraine to surrender and agree to Putin's conditions is, by the way, not so obvious either, because these conditions are not clear. What you said are the preconditions. Putin has never really given up on the main goal of eliminating Ukrainian statehood, and the Europeans understand that. Now the situation in Europe is also changing, and if there is political will in Europe, they can send Trump too. I think that Trump also realizes that, of course, he is important, but he is not the most important in this story. He's in charge, but he's not the only decision maker. If Europe takes a principled position, Trump will be forced to seek compromise solutions. Of course, American weapons are important, but on the other hand, Europe has money and no one has canceled the idea of confiscating Russian assets with which to buy the same American weapons, which, by the way, Trump will gladly sell. So this story is non-linear. It's not a linear equation. There are so many levels. We just have to wait to see what Trump starts to do as president, because I can't give our listeners any clear recommendations on how things will develop further. I don't think Trump knows that either. And still, the situation will not turn into another problem for Ukraine. But I would not go to either extreme. Neither too much pessimism, nor too much optimism.
Нашим слушателям о том, как это вот все будет развиваться дальше. Я подозреваю, сам Трамп этого уж точно не знает. Вот. И будем надеяться, что эта непредсказуемость, она все-таки не обернется, конечно, очередной проблемой для Украины. Вот. Но опять, я бы как бы не впадал ни в одну крайность. Ни в излишний пессимизм, ни в излишний оптимизм.
This is the situation as it is now. The only thing that can be credited is that it is quite obvious. I think Trump is being reported that economic difficulties in Russia are increasing. In fact, already only the lazy, as they say, or only the unengaged, that is, or super-engaged pro-Putin lobbyists in the West, can try to ignore the fact that today the Russian economy and the overall situation in Russia are approaching a critical line. The question of whether Putin has enough resources to continue the war is becoming more and more topical. Already even Western publications, such as Economist, are saying that 2025 could be catastrophic for the Russian economy. So Putin's puffed-up cheeks, which we saw once again on his direct line, remain, as they say, on his conscience. The Ukrainian authorities know better. Although from my point of view, Kyslytsya was a very good representative of Ukraine, as was the foreign minister, who is generally very capable, according to all the Western politicians with whom I have spoken. But again, I am not the one who determines Ukraine's foreign policy. My advice here is that of an outsider. Although it is certainly strange to me that the kind of activity that could lead to serious results in Washington has so far gone unnoticed.
Гарри Кимович, а вы говорили, что нам сейчас нужно стараться влиять на тех, кто влияет на Трампа и помогает ему принимать решения. А кого вы имели в виду?
Ну, в принципе, это новые люди в американской администрации. Это тот же Марко Рубио, это то, ну, может быть, в меньшей степени Марко Рубио, это больше, наверное, Майкл.
Или на самом деле там Трамп?
Ну, он на самом деле... Не, ну, понятно, что Трамп будет принять решение как Трамп. Это здесь вот. Но, тем не менее, если мы имеем позицию, скажем, согласованной Рубио, Вальца, каких-то еще республиканцев, ну, понятно, что есть еще там Маск там со своей компанией, которые говорят совсем другое. Но, в общем, будет какой-то баланс. Трамп должен для себя, как говорится, принять какое-то решение, потому что, ну, ему-то, как бы, ему нести это бремя. То есть, а он как раз, я думаю, про место в истории свое думает сейчас. Как бы, пойти на поводу у Путина, мне кажется, опять кажется. Для него будет совершенно неприемлемо. Но нам нужна работа. Вот, я, к сожалению, пока этой работы я там не вижу, как бы вот в Вашингтоне украинской. Ну, может быть, я смотрю плохо, в общем-то. Я сейчас увидел, что сейчас произошла смена постпреда ООН. Ну, как бы с украинской власти виднее, хотя, с моей точки зрения, в общем, Кислиця был очень хорошим представителем Украины. Так же, как и министр иностранных дел был, в общем-то, очень дееспособный, по мнению всех, как бы, западных политиков, с которыми я общался. Вот, ну, опять, не я определяю внешнюю политику Украины, в общем-то, мои советы здесь как советы постороннего. Хотя мне, конечно, в общем-то, странно, что та активность, которая могла бы привести к каким-то результатам серьезным в Вашингтоне, она пока, скажем, ну...
Now there is a lot of talk not only about what kind of agreement there might be, but also about what Ukraine will get as a result. Because sitting down at the table with the Russians and negotiating something without clear security guarantees is not just dangerous, it is essentially pointless. Zelensky noted that after meeting with the U.S. president-elect in Paris, he emphasized the need for a just and strong world that the Russians would not destroy. Also, the head of the president's office, Yermak, spoke about the fact that Trump has great respect for Zelensky and Ukraine. He wants to end the war with a just peace, but he will not take Ukraine to NATO. As for these security guarantees, can there really be anything else but NATO? There are maybe nuclear weapons, for example. A very good security guarantee that Ukraine gave up 30 years ago. And NATO troops on the line of demarcation are real troops. Not UN peacekeepers, but real NATO troops. American, British, Dutch, Danish, French. These are the real weighty arguments. From my point of view, talking about NATO is just a rejection of common sense. Ukraine is fighting the war that NATO was created for. NATO was created only to protect Europe from Russian aggression. The only country waging this war is Ukraine. Therefore, it is already, in fact, as they say, a NATO country. This is a demonstration of political impotence and an attempt to maintain the status quo, which has long since been destroyed. I think it is important to realize that negotiations can take place. Yes, the war can stop for a while. I repeat, for a while, because the goals set by Putin in this war, in the case of any agreement, will still not be realized. That's understandable. It's not a question of whether a contract will be signed, most likely. It's a possibility everyone needs a break, but it will be a temporary pause, as Putin will continue to prepare for the next war. Russian economy, ideology, and social life are based on war. In Putin's Russia, war is a permanent condition. If not on the battlefield, if not in Donbass and Zaporizhzhia, it will be a hybrid war against the EU countries, America, or the continuation of aggressive actions in other parts of the world. Putin is war. Therefore, there can be no doubt that any treaty, no matter how favorable it may be for Ukraine in terms of security guarantees, will still mean Putin's preparation for war. But the opposite is also true. Any Ukrainian government, the current one or the one that will replace it, will still not accept Putin's annexation of Ukrainian territory. Ukraine will seek by any government to restore the 91st year borders, the only legally recognized borders. By the way, none of the treaty Trump is proposing recognizes Russian conquests. It merely fixes the situation, freezes it. This means that a generation of Ukrainians will still be raised. The tasks will be to restore lost territories, as after the Franco-Prussian War of 1670. The situation is similar, because everything was recognized, including Russia, and annexation is actually theft of territories by war. There will be preparations amidst the restoration of peaceful life, but a new war is also being prepared. Ukraine will make every effort to upgrade its military potential, and it is not necessary to wait for American missiles. For example, the Hazel was developed in Dnipro back in the USSR, and there are no problems with specialists. We will wait for a year, 2-3 years to pass. But it is clear that a clash is inevitable because Putin's goal is to liquidate Ukraine, and Ukraine's goal is to preserve its territorial integrity. These goals are incompatible, and there can be no peace treaty because there is no point of contact. This means that the war will be resumed, and it will be necessary to prepare and help Ukraine to win. Because a Ukrainian victory in this war is the only way to change the situation in Russia. But even if we talk about freezing the conflict and NATO troops in Ukraine, will anything come out of this idea if Russia is against it? Obviously, Russia will be against it. They're already saying no NATO troops in Ukraine. If this proposal comes from Trump, he's kind of okay with it. Is there any way he can get the Kremlin to agree to such a condition? I always qualify my phrases, because if that happens, it's far from obvious to me that Putin would agree to freeze the conflict. It could be, but the probability seems to me to be below 50%. As for what Trump might do, he may be swallowing dust in the deserts of Arizona and Nevada, but he has enough reserve to quickly unite forces and give Putin an ultimatum as to how the war will end. However, this requires political will. Putin is already hysterical over 2 Ukrainian drones flying into Kazan. American missiles, such as the Tomahawk, can reach Moscow if necessary. The possibilities for the West, both economic and military, to put Putin in his place are endless. If he wanted to, Trump could start oil production in the U.S. and hold the market without Russian oil. Closing the northern route would cause half of Russia's oil to disappear. The Russian economy could collapse in a year. You can supply as many weapons as you want, and essentially no one wants them. It's all about political will and goal setting. Trump needs to propose a concept. If this concept is reasonable, then I believe it will not be difficult to convince Putin physically by demonstrating the physical power that the West has, both America and Europe. It is important to fix this goal because the Biden administration has done nothing, and general phrases like "we will be with Ukraine as long as necessary" did not scare Putin. Today, Ukraine is in a very difficult situation because that the Biden administration did not want to allow a military defeat of Russia. Friends, put a like, write comments, ask questions, and indicate from what city and country you are watching us. We want Trump to give us weapons, including Tomahawks, and deploy nuclear weapons. However, he did say he might reconsider Biden's decision to strike Russia. He said Ukraine should not have been allowed such strikes and called it a bad and stupid decision. That said, many Americanists and even Republicans said Biden was just coordinating with Trump. Why does he say one thing in public and another behind doors with Biden? Welcome. That's exactly what I was talking about. Trump is doing what is to his advantage today, so I would in no way consider Trump's statement as a political constant. There is a common strategic line in America that is clearly supported by most Republicans, and especially those who are now clustered around Trump on foreign policy issues. And so yes, again, Trump can make some statements, but overall the general line, I think, is going to be to allow Ukraine to demonstrate to Putin the price to be paid for continuing the war. So again, we talked about whether Trump has the ability to get Putin to accept certain conditions. The answer is yes. Biden had those opportunities, and it was possible to win the war in 2022 as well as 2023. The question is what goals would be set. I still find it difficult to answer, because Trump has not fully answered this question. The number of his contradictory statements does not allow us to accurately assess the degree of his readiness to fight for a just peace. Because what is a just peace? It is clear that Putin sees it in a completely different way, unlike all of us. Also, again, Trump, I think, will see Ukraine as part of a global process in which America's role needs to be found. On the one hand, America first, that is, to deal with American problems. On the other hand, it is clear even to Trump that America cannot withdraw from the world. America's role remains key. finding a balance is a rather complicated thing, so I would still take a pause and wait to see what Trump will do after the 20th, after the inauguration, after they start appointing his people to key positions, or rather confirming them in the Senate. So, I think it will be too early to draw any conclusions before mid-February. So he's not going to end the war in 24 hours after the inauguration? No, first of all, 24 hours have already passed, as they say. So far, as they say, nothing has really happened, meaning the war continues, people are dying, Putin continues to bomb Ukraine, continues to commit crimes with the Russian army of occupation, and Trump is making statements so far. Nothing is clear from these statements yet, but we should not forget that the situation in Europe is complicated. There have been changes there, and other people have come to power. For example, instead of Borrell, there is now Kaja Kallas, former Prime Minister of Estonia, who is in charge of foreign policy and security in Europe. This is actually also an indicator that the decision-making centers in Europe are shifting to the east. There's a Portuguese, here an Estonian, and we can see that the bias of European politics is shifting in this direction. This is happening precisely because there is a war going on. Kallas's position on the war in Ukraine is absolutely unambiguous, and her demands are among the most radical, including the confiscation of Russian assets. It is obvious that the balance in Europe is changing, although there are fifth columns like Orban and Fitz, but the overall balance is shifting. Europe may turn out to be a more serious player than many of us previously thought.